This is your Filipino radio experience in Las Vegas. PHLV Radio. The Asian American Pacific Islander Nurses Association of Nevada presents Healthy Mondays with Apina of Nevada. Start the week healthy and right with interesting conversations on living a healthy lifestyle. And now, your Healthy Mondays host, Dr. Marife Aczon Armstrong.
Aloha! Good evening! Magandang gabi po sa inyong lahat in Tagalog, maayong gabi in Ilocano, and in Cebuano na imbag nga rabi. Thank you again for tuning in with us. Maraming salamat sa inyong pagtangkilik sa aming programa at sa patuloy na pagtangkilik sa aming mga Healthy Mondays. And as you know, this is going to be our 4th series for anti-Asian hate crimes. What is your role? So we have a lot of sad news to share. I know that in Series 1 and 2 and Series 3, we had mentioned about 3 specific Asians who suffered from hate crimes, which we are not sure if they're going to identify it as hate crimes. It's still in investigations. However, I wanted to share about the recent attack in Asian women in Atlanta, Georgia. We had so much information that we wanted to share, and I'm sure that by now all of you have some details about what happened. But I wanted to mention individually the people who passed away, who were shot to death during that. So let's focus on the 8 victims, their families, and their incredible American lives. You can also pull it out in the Facebook, but I just want to mention their names because we don't really have time to tell you in details. The first one I have on my list is Sung Jung Park, 74 years old. Yoon Jung Grant, 51 years old. Sunja Kim, 69 years old. Yang A Yu, 63 years old. Delina Ashley Young, 33 years old. Xiao J Tan, 49 years old. Down Yo Feng, 44 years old. And Paul Andrea Michels, 54 years old. So what we know about the victims in the Atlanta shootings, 6 of the 8 people killed at Atlanta in the area spas where women, Asian descent people are gathering. So tonight we have a very special guest. But before I introduce our special guest tonight, I wanted to introduce my co-host. And he is not new to Healthy Mondays. He is the current Asian American Pacific Islander Nurse Association of Nevada president, Dr. Reimund Serafica. Dr. Ray?
Hello, good evening, Marife. Good evening po sa inyong lahat. I'm back and we are continuing this dialogue about anti-Asian hate crimes and the roles that we can do for the community. Really important. So I'm really excited to be here. Thank you again, Marife, and thank you PHLB Radio for airing this series.
Yes, thank you for co-hosting this series with me.
My pleasure.
I just wanted to spark the interest of our listeners out there, so they don't turn off the radio and they continue listening. So some of the spark words that I wanted to say is sex, gender aspect, gender dimensions, women are target to hate crimes. Why are Asian Americans forever foreigners? We'll also touch upon the Chinese Exclusion Act, the resistance. You know that the glass ceiling for Asians is still existing. Microaggression is also another word that we need to ponder on. And as we continue, I'd like to introduce Constancio Arnaldo Jr., and I would like to read his bio for you and get to know him. And we'll get to know him as we talk through the program. So Constancio Realiza Arnaldo Jr. is an assistant professor in Asian and Asian American Studies in the Department of Interdisciplinary Gender and Ethnic Studies at the University of Nevada, Las Vegas. A child of immigrant parents from the Philippines, Constancio is a second-generation Filipino-American who grew up in the Bay Area. He's also a first-generation college student. He earned his Doctor of Philosophy in Anthropology with an emphasis in Asian American Studies from the University of Illinois, Urbana-Champaign. His research examines the racial politics of sport among diasporic Filipino Americans in everyday sporting spaces. For example, flag football and basketball, and boxing spectacles, primarily through Manny Pacquiao fights. Wow, that's exciting. He is the co-editor, that's Constancio, is the co-editor of Asian American Sporting Cultures in New York University Press 2016, and has published articles in the areas of race, ethnicity, class, masculinity, and sexuality. So welcome to Healthy Mondays, Constancio.
Thank you for having me. It's an honor to be here with you all, and I appreciate the time that you've given me.
So would you like to add more information about yourself that you would like our listeners to know about you?
Sure. So as you've said in the bio, I teach classes in Asian American Studies. This semester, I'm teaching a class called Asian American Sporting Cultures and COLA 100, which is for first-year college freshmen. Let's see. I also teach classes in Interdisciplinary Studies and Women's and Gender Studies. And I've lived in Vegas since 2016. I love it here, and I didn't think I'd ever say that I loved living in Las Vegas, but so far, so good.
Wow, I also moved here from Hawaii, 2016. Transplant we are.
Yeah.
And you look so young. You know, one thing that I wanted to share to our listeners, if you don't already know, Asians have the gift of youth. We have probably somehow, we drank from the fountain of youth, right?
I'd like to think so, yeah. I like to drink a lot of water, definitely. And, because this is Healthy Mondays, I really think that it's important that we promote our health. Dr. Serafica and I were talking about food acculturation amongst Filipinos, and I think it's important that we promote healthy lifestyles and to take care of ourselves.
Yes, and that comes in, and I'm a very strong proponent and advocate of mind, body, and spirit. And so our topic tonight is very timely. We're going to talk about the well-being of all Asians and even friends and families of Asians. This is really sad news, and I can't believe it's still happening in the modern world. And I know, Constancio, we had looked at a lot of different questions to guide our broadcast tonight. So tell us more about your background related to diversity, so then we can set up the platform to our listeners out there that you have a lot to share regarding this topic that we have tonight.
Yeah, and so I think, I'd like to start off with my own story. I grew up in the Bay Area of California, as you've read, but I grew up in a very white suburban neighborhood. And so for me, making sense of race at a very young age was something that I'll never forget. I was racialized as somebody that automatically knew martial arts. People would make these, the Asian eyes towards me. And so the way in which I came to understand race was through my own experiences, and I didn't have the language for it. But I think that's what also drew me to ethnic studies, especially taking classes in ethnic studies and understanding what it meant to be a brown Asian American. And so the more I went to college and took classes, the more that I was inspired to be more critical about race beyond black and white, and to think more thoroughly about spaces like sports are also very much racialized and gendered. And so that became a way for me to understand how race works, not only in my own life, but also amongst other people of color, minoritized groups, African Americans, Latinos, indigenous peoples, and how race works relationally across these different groups. And so one of the reasons why I wanted to pursue a PhD was to use the knowledge to teach, but also to make a difference and to use knowledge as transformative. And this space right here is a really important and critical opportunity for us to discuss these issues.
Yeah, we're very blessed. Thank you for sharing your thoughts about that. We are all blessed to have this platform. So thank you again, PHLV Radio, for partnering with us. what a great opportunity to be in that platform to really, share our voice. Because as I have mentioned, I think I mentioned in Series 3 that the Asians are looked at and stereotyped as meek and humble. But that doesn't equate to weakness, right? And again, I'm going to say our meekness and being humble, our humility, are instilled in us by our parents, grandparents, our ancestors, because that's part of our values. But that doesn't and should not give others the ticket to bully us and to hurt us and to even kill us, just like what happened. So I guess from here, I wanted to check again our questions here. The controversies about the recent wave of attacks in Asian Americans, now recently women. Women are considered one of the vulnerable populations. And what are your thoughts about this wave of attacks?
I mean, it's just truly heartbreaking and disturbing and angering and frustrating, all kind of wrapped up in one. And I think your point about it being gendered violence is very important. So stopaapihate.org. I think the website is down, maybe because a lot of people are trying to get on the website. But the last time I checked, they had reported that 68% of the hate incidents or hate crimes were reported by women. 29% were reported by men, and the youths and elderly were highly targeted. And so I want to go back to the fact that because this is a gendered dynamic, Asian and Asian American women are gendered and racialized and sexualized differently. And there's a reputation, or at least a stereotype, that Asian and Asian American women are exotic, they're sexually available, they're promiscuous, and therefore people think that they're submissive. And so that adds to the layered dynamic of Asian and Asian American women being targeted. And the fact that this is not a new phenomenon, this actually dates back to the 1800s. So for example, in 1875, there was a Page Law that was enacted, like a federal statute that was passed that targeted Japanese and Chinese immigrant women, assuming that they were prostitutes and that they were promiscuous. And so this kind of imagination of Asian and Asian American women and their bodies as prostitutes or sexual available or submissive, the geisha girl, the lotus blossom, all of that is wrapped up in these stereotypes, and we see the kinds of violence that are inflicted upon them.
That's a good point. I know that I have not checked the facts about this, that because the Japanese war, we were occupied by the Japanese, right, in the Philippines. And so you can see that I think in history where a lot of the Filipino women were raped by the Japanese soldiers, right? So from there, there's a lot of assumptions around this recent attack, and it really I was disappointed when I saw that the perpetrator was saying that, and they were identifying the police, the sheriff was identifying that it's related to sexual addictions. So, Dr. Ray, what do you think about that as our new nurse practitioner in psych mental health?
That was, something that we need to think about too, Marife. Going back to our last series, when I was your guest and we mentioned, and this is before the Atlanta shooting, we were mentioning about what would it take for them to pay attention. And it took 8 more lives before they even have this bigger conversation. It's really frustrating, and it's really, I'm sharing my emotions with you guys, being so angry and frustrated all about because of this. And Constancio is right. I checked the website for the AAPI hate. And it says there that women reported hate incidents 2.3 times more than men. California and New York, the 2 states with the largest Asian American population, had also the most reported hate incidents with 1691 in Cali, and 517 in New York. So when we look at, because somebody is having a bad day and they decided to shoot people, that's not right. Bottom line is, that's the violation of every right that a human can avail, and this is something that we really need to talk about and bring to the right people. I'm glad that the media now is paying attention a little bit, but I think we need to really, ask them to do more.
Yes, I agree with you. So what do you think, Constancio, in your point?
Yeah, I 100% agree. I think it shouldn't have taken 8 more deaths for the media or even politicians to pay attention. And again, violence against Asian and Asian Americans is not new. In 1982, Vincent Chin was targeted. He was a Chinese American, but 2 white male auto workers targeted him, assuming that he was Japanese, and he was killed. In 1871, there was a Chinese massacre where close to 20 Chinese boys and men were killed in Los Angeles. And so these acts against Asian and Asian Americans, they're repeated time and time again throughout different moments in U.S. history. And this could have been prevented, and unfortunately it was not. And so people, we all have a role to play to mobilize and to speak out.
This is really sad. I saw a quote here that it's staring at me. It says, if you focus on the hurt, you will continue to suffer. If you focus on the lesson, you will continue to grow. So I ask our community out there, what is the lesson that we're learning from this hurt? So let's focus, let's shift the hurt and the sadness, the anger, and the desire to take revenge into what lesson can we learn from here. So, as an educator, so what would be the lesson that you think that we wanted to come out of this sad situation that we're in right now?
So one of the things that I'm not sure if you've talked about before was that Asian Americans are also considered the quote-unquote model minority. And part of that, as part of the community, is rejecting the model minority because it acts as a racial wedge against other people of color and minoritized groups. The model minority stereotype came at a moment in U.S. history in the 1960s, particularly 1965, where already privileged Asian ethnic groups came to the U.S., were already educated, and that came at a moment when there was a civil rights movement where people of color like African Americans and Latinos were protesting for their civil rights. Mainstream media felt that if African Americans and Latinos could just act like the model minorities who are Asian Americans, they would get out of poverty, they didn't need to protest. But that is really, it's flawed, and it drives a racial wedge against us to collaborate and to enact in terms of racial solidarity. And the model minority also assumes that Asian Americans are apolitical, that we're silent, that we won't say anything. And I think a lot of people assume that if they attack Asian Americans, that we're not going to say anything, that we're not going to fight back. But again, we have evidence throughout history that we have fought back, that we have protested, that we have made claims to belong to this country. And so part of that, I think, one of the lessons is like, how do we learn about this history? And then how do we use that knowledge to engage in solidarity with other groups who have also been oppressed?
Yeah, that's a very good point. I know that I wanted to bring out this concepts. There were 2 concepts that I learned while writing the book chapter. What makes a population vulnerable and the impact of marginalization. Let me go back to what you say, that word minoritized. I think our listeners out there, do you know what minoritized means? Do you know what minority means? If you are Asian, you are minoritized. So I'm looking here the 5 characteristics of a minority group. One is, this is according to Charles Swagley and Marvin Harris. This is back in 1958. A minority group is distinguished by 5 characteristics. 1, unequal treatment and less power over their lives. 2, distinguishing physical or cultural traits like skin color or language. 3, involuntary membership in the group. And awareness. 4, awareness of subordination. And 5, I can't find it right now, so I'm going to come back to the number 5 later on. Remind me. So, Dr. Ray, so anything else that you wanted to add with what Constancio shared with us with the history?
Yes. So one of the things too that probably it's the stigma about Asian women, and also the stereotype that they portray, like even in medias. When I look at some of these, the patterns are always like, how they brand Asian women being too exotic. They're not a leader. Somebody who's submissive. They are cute and small. And they are invisible, and they are service worker. And the last one, service worker, I remember back in Toronto, Canada, was supposed to be like, a multicultural, diverse, embracing community. When I was there as a teenager, actually, I was waiting for a ride from a friend of mine who's also Asian, and one of my white friends was asking me, "Oh, is your friend coming?" I said, "Yes." "Is she Asian too?" I said, "Yes." "Oh, she works in the food court to clean garbage?" I said, "No, actually she's an accountant. She's a CPA, and she has a master's degree in finance from University of Toronto." And I ended up that relationship with my friend, supposed to be my friend, having said that, and it really hurt my feelings, because like, there you go, like they just stereotype my friend who's well educated and well respected in her field, and branding her like a service worker. And I don't mind service worker. I mean, those are good and honest jobs, but then they have back of the majority's mind is like saying, oh, because they're Asian, they're probably just doing something like that. So that's not right.
That stereotyping is really hurting us. Yeah. So what are your experiences as you're teaching your students? What are the things is there any story that you can share with us where you had the opportunity to instill in your students about the importance of not stereotyping people?
Well, yeah, I mean, so the way that stereotypes work is that images get repeated over and over and over again. And, you mentioned this branding, right? If an image gets repeated over and over again, then people just start believing it, right? And so we have to ask ourselves, how do stereotypes, like in the media or in television or YouTube, like, where are the opportunities for people to challenge those, right? Who's at the table to make decisions about how people get represented, right? And so I think, one, we have to be critical about media, but two, we have to also engage in these conversations about like what's being reproduced over and over again. In terms of your question, Marife, I think, my students teach me a lot too in terms of their own experiences, especially when I teach Asian American Studies courses, right? They tell me how much they relate to the material because of the way that, again, when we read about the stereotypes or the violence that Asian and Asian Americans face, they see that because some of them have also experienced that. I had a student last spring when COVID-19 just hit, they told me that people were spitting on them, right? And saying, go back to Asia or wherever you came from. And so those are moments that are really difficult to process. And I'm grateful to my students who teach me these things and tell me and share their stories with me, because these are the stories that continually happen in our communities, even though it's not reported, right? And so the data that Stop AAPI or hate.org mentions, that's self-reporting. That's not even including the people that don't go to that website and report it. And so, yeah, I like to think that my classes are, they're shared dialogues, they're conversations. Of course, I do some teaching, but at the same time, we make sense of this phenomena together as a class. At least I hope so. And that teaching and learning is also reciprocal in that way.
Yeah, I'm glad that you pointed it out that we all can learn from each other. And I know the stories are powerful. And sometimes, I do a twist in this show. I'm going to tell you a funny story where we're Ilocanos, I'm part Ilocano and Tagalog, and I heard that Filipinos in Hawaii were stereotyped as manang, or they don't know how to match their clothes. So I am one that always match my clothes because of that stereotype. So I think little things like that we wanted to change the image. They have the stereotype like that, and I think for me, actions speak louder than voice. You can no, not all Filipino. We're not manang, but instead, you show them that what they're saying is wrong. And I think that actions speak louder than voice. So I'm going to go back to the number fifth characteristics by Wagley and Harris. So I said number one is unequal treatment and less power over their lives as a definition of minority group. Distinguishing physical or cultural traits like skin of color or language. Involuntary membership in the group. We do have interracial marriages, right? And I'm going to go back to that with number five. And number four is awareness of subordination. And five is the high rate of in-group marriage. Additional examples of minority groups might include the LGBT community, that we need to include them, religious practitioners whose faith is not widely practiced where they live, and people with disabilities. So I think going back to why we're having this series right now with anti-Asian hate crimes, what is your role? So I'm looking at the time because time flies when we're having fun. But we did start a little later. So I guess, Ray, can you give insight about some things that is probably the mental health? Let's go back to that sexual
Okay. All right. Yes. Actually, the
addiction.
website that Constancio mentioned about the Stop AAPI Hate, you can actually read some of the reports there, and they're very, very powerful. One of the things that really caught my eyes when I was like browsing, is actually happening here in Las Vegas. And this particular one, she said that a driver said to me after I got into his car, "Damn, another Asian riding with me today.
Wow.
I hope you don't have any COVID." Read one testimonial from Las Vegas in the report. After I told him, "Have a good day," he replied back, "You shouldn't be requesting any more rides from anybody." So when we were talking about this, Marife, 2 weeks, 3 weeks ago, we were saying that, well, it's only happening in New York, it's only happening in California, but it's happening now in our own backyard. And when Constancio mentioned that people are spitting on his students, I mean, you will be exposed to that kind of experience, and you will be emotionally scarred. And how do you move from that? It's time to talk about it, get a counselor, or please talk to your primary care if you don't have a nurse practitioner or a psychiatry, that needs to be consulted, because this brings to a person's level of emotional distress. We talk about acute stress disorder that probably will translate into PTSD later on. And once you have those comorbidities, emotional comorbidities, it can easily translate into more anxiety, more depression, more psychosis if they already have one. So please, folks, always talk about it, ask for help. You can start with people you trust, and then go from there. Ask for referral.
Yeah, our cultural values, Ray, is that we don't talk about it. And the stigma, again, I know that on my doctoral program where I talked about the concept of depression, how we identify Asians. In Filipino, you don't want to be identified as luka-luka. Luka-luka is crazy because then it make a reflection, not a good reflection on your family, so they hide it, and so they don't get the proper treatment and therapy that they need. So we're changing our norms now. We're actually going away from what our parents and grandparents long time ago are saying, that be humble, be meek. It's better to be humble and meek, those good values, and also don't make waves. Don't talk about it. Shh, quiet, don't talk about it. Go to your room. So now we are now changing our cultural values into one that we speak out for ourselves, right? And I know, Constancio, you can represent the younger generation. I know Matthew Dang, our previous speaker, had shared a lot of insights coming from how you were brought up and how it is now evolving, and how we are now allowing our students to be more vocal and be more speaking their minds. I think that's what I would say. So what is your personal experiences in that aspect? Dig deeper now.
So my personal experience speaking out,
Yes.
I think whenever I hear stories, or even whenever I tell my own story, I think it also it allows me to ground myself in the truth of my existence, and that my story matters because the kind of racism that I've experienced. And so I'd like to think that I'm not a yeller. I don't like to yell. But I think speaking out is also just having conversations and challenging people maybe who say racist things or sexist things or misogynist things, homophobic things. Speaking out involves writing about these experiences. So, for example, I just published an article about Asian American women playing flag football and how their very act of playing flag football challenges the stereotypes of Asian American exoticness and meekness and humility.
We're supposed to be mahinhin,
right? And so
modest.
that article was very personal to me because I witnessed the kinds of athletic excellence that these women played, engaged in, and performed. And so I guess to go back to your question about that, for me, it's the way that I teach, it's the way that I write about things, and speaking out, even when it's sharing my own story with family members. And so, yeah, I don't know if I answered your question, but those are the multiple ways that I try to use my voice and my platform.
Yeah, so our listeners out there, use your voice. Speak up if you see someone who is being bullied because for whatever reason, and you just tell them that's not okay. Hey, that's not okay. I can't believe you're doing that. So challenge them. I guess, it depends on who you are and your personality. If you're not comfortable with it, then go tell someone who would speak up about what's happening. Because I think, that's what we need to do. We need to make it known. We need to be aware. Sometimes we're not sure, is that considered bullying? Is that considered incivility? Sometimes we're like, okay, maybe they're just joking around. It happens a lot in the emergency room. I don't know. I was a case manager in an emergency room, and when they start talking to each other, it was like, are they insulting each other? But sometimes it is just to make the situation more like if somebody came in and probably died or something. So you need to discern if that is bullying or are they just joking around. So a lot of things that we can, increase awareness. I wanted to say education, but I think it's more on increasing awareness of everyone, not only Asians, but everyone, because we are all in this together, right?
Mm-hmm. And one thing more too, Marife, if I may add, like you promote the minority rights within the majority rule society is always challenging, but we had to stand for it. The intersection between gender, for example, and race made Asian women uniquely vulnerable to violence. And I asked the community, don't let them. Stand up, speak up, and condemn this kind of acts, because once they are aware that you disagree and you are saying no, that you are not letting them violate you, then you are contributing to the movement, to the act of stopping Asian hate crimes.
And be consistent.
Correct.
Keep doing it and doing until they get it. Because sometimes I have to give them the benefit of the doubt that they are not aware that that's what they're doing, because that's what they have been brought up, that it's okay. At home, when they are having conversation with the family, and it was okay. If the parents are doing it and it's okay, then the children are thinking, oh, I guess it's okay. And then until they encounter that it's not okay. So keep on repeating it, be consistent. When you see someone doing it, then correct them until they get it. So I'm for equality, I'm for diversity, I am for inclusion. Because you can have diversity and equality, but if there's no inclusion, those diversity and equality means nothing, right? So time flies when we're having fun. I think I said that already. Are you having fun yet, Constancio?
Yeah, I'm enjoying this conversation.
Yeah, so thank you very much for agreeing to be our guest tonight. And Ray, thank you for co-hosting with me, PHLB Radio. Thank you so much for this platform. Did you wanted to, I always ask, before we go, can you share to our listeners some words of wisdom?
So I will share. I got to think about it, but I didn't get a chance to thank you both, and thanking your audience, because from what I understand, a lot of them are nurses. And so I want to thank the healthcare workers, especially in this moment of COVID-19. Thank you for putting your lives on the line, for being frontline workers, for providing the kind of care and support that you have for patients who are either stricken with COVID-19 or just come in sick. My mom was a nurse. My aunts and uncles are nurses. And so to me, nurses hold a special place in my heart because of that. In terms of words of wisdom, I would just say, oftentimes we hear about stories, right? Stories about racism and sexism and misogyny. But we need to mobilize around these stories and to make sure that people are aware of these stories. I read an article in the New York Times where groups of African Americans, Asian Americans, Latinos, and and white allies were also protesting together. And to me, that's promising, because we can't just do it in our own individual communities. We need people to engage in cross-racial solidarity so that we can actually change the system.
Well said. Thank you so much. Ray, do you have any words of wisdom to our listeners?
Well, Constancio summed it all already. So I just want to, again, my gratitude to PHLB Radio, to Mr. Johan in the silent room, and also to Apina of Nevada, who is supporting this initiative for our community. Mabuhay.
Yeah. Thank you, partner, Johan.
Thank you, Johan.
Yes. And I know that this is our 4th series for anti-Asian hate crimes. What is your role? But I wanted to echo there and resonate to all our listeners. Please get your COVID-19 vaccines when it becomes available to you. We have vaccine clinics. I have been volunteering. I think it's my 7th or 8th time volunteering. And I see a lot of Asians. They're brought by their mothers or their grandchildren. So keep it going. And remember, you still need to wear your face mask. You still need to follow social distancing. I know we love to parties, we love to eat, but we need to protect each other, right? So having said that, please stay safe and be healthy. And remember, every Monday is a healthy Monday. Aloha.
The Asian American Pacific Islander Nurses Association of Nevada has just brought you Healthy Mondays with Apina of Nevada.